Teague Moore, welcome to the podcast, my friend.
Good to be on. Thank you for having me.
It is an honor, man. And gosh, just going down your journey this morning. I just watched a couple of your matches, and let's just start there because we're gonna talk about Pennsylvania in the 80s and 90s. But you talk about Eric Juergens. He grew up in our area and just one of the toughest dudes you ever come across. Had you wrestled him before that semifinals your junior year?
Um, that's a good question. I don't think that we did. I think because that year was really kind of a messed up year. That was the year that the three wrestlers died. They paused our season, changed the weight classes. We started at 118, but then they moved it to 125. But I don't think I did see him prior to that.
No Iowa duel that year? Like that,
I
I was looking
I,
for. I
uh
didn't see it.
I can't remember. I don't think so. I don't know.
Yeah, he and for folks who don't remember that name, four-time undefeated Iowa State champ would go on to beat Stephen Abbas twice in that tournament, which that's pretty crazy. But yeah, just that match was just a burner going right down to the wire. What do you remember from that scrap?
I remember that specifically, like I have a vivid memory of right at the end, we had gone out of bounds, we came back towards the center, and I remember just shooting a low single right off the whistle and getting to his leg and scoring the final points to win the match. I know it was a tight one throughout because we were both early on, we were both kind of reluctant to open up. And then once we did start opening up, he and I both got into some really good deep shots, but we scrambled pretty hard and kept each other from scoring. So it was a low scoring match, but there was a good amount of action in it.
Yeah, were you always a legger like that? Like you really put some good leg rides on.
Yeah, I ended up becoming a cross body ride guy. Like where I grew up in the high school that I went to, we had a Hall of Fame legendary coach named Gus D'Agostino. Now he didn't coach me in high school; he coached my brother, but that's where I learned cross body ride. And then Kendall Cross, um, one of our Oklahoma State alums, he had shared quite a bit on his cross body ride, which worked for me extremely well. So short legs. I had to change my body position a little bit, but it worked for me.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see you go to that because like the battle is right off the whistle there. If you can get that leg in on the right side, yeah, that was a fun match. Just because you think about 97's been so well documented. It's Gable's last year.
Yeah.
98 though, transitionary time. Oklahoma State has two NCAA champs back to back weights, so it's like that's just that nationals is a lot of fun to look at.
Yeah. Well, the Jurgens semifinals was 98. 97 was I lost a Whitmer. I lost a Whitmer in the semis in 97. I beat Jurgens in 98, and then I lost to Abbas in 99.
And that match was, I was just watching it. Seriously, one of the best semifinals I've ever watched in terms of the scrambles.
Yeah.
Like, oh my gosh, I just couldn't believe it. Well, let's go. You mentioned the high school you went to. North Allegheny is where I imagine that's where you went since your brother went there, and that's
Mhm.
one of the legendary programs of Pennsylvania. What was it like growing up in Pittsburgh in the late 80s, early 90s?
Looking back on it, I didn't know any different at the time. Um, but basically, Pittsburgh at that time was going through a tough transition. You're like, it's the end of the steel era. There was a lot of friends, families that we either knew of that were somehow it it was just a tough time for people to have jobs, for the industry to keep moving forward in Pittsburgh. I didn't know that at the time, right?
Right.
I was just growing up. Wrestling was my life. I was thinking about this the other day. The name of your podcast, Wrestling, changed my life. But honestly, since I was born, I immediately went into wrestling because I had three older brothers that wrestled. Um, it was for me, wrestling was just a part of my life. It's what we did growing up. Mark Angle, one of your guests, and Jim Harshaw, another one of your guests. Like we literally grew up every Saturday. We didn't get up and watch cartoons. We were at wrestling tournaments at probably 70% of the Saturdays throughout a whole year. We were in a gym somewhere beating each other up. And so that was kind of my childhood. I didn't know anything other than a life of wrestling.
And you mentioned your brothers wrestled. That's an understatement because one of your older brothers was the first four-timer in the new class system in Pennsylvania. Talk a little bit about his high school accomplishments.
So Ty, he won 4 Pennsylvania state titles, only lost once in high school from 87 to 1990. And our family started in a school district called Seneca Valley. And that's where I'm the youngest of seven. And so the five older siblings all went to Seneca Valley. Two of my brothers wrestled there. That's where our wrestling story kind of started at Seneca Valley. And now, different time, my dad knew my brother Ty was going to be pretty good in high school. So in between his 8th and 9th grade year, my dad has a conversation with Gus D'Agostino, the coach at North Allegheny, and my dad makes the decision he's going to move Ty to North Allegheny. So it was only like 2 or 3 weeks before school began. My dad and Ty moved to North Allegheny, and they rented a room so that they could get residence in the district and he could go to school. And our original school district, Seneca Valley, nobody really knew about it until school began and Ty wasn't in school. And then people started asking, where was he? And turns out he's enrolled at North Allegheny. And so back then you didn't have what you have now, which is like this very litigious, everybody wants to stop kids and parents from being able to get their kids to the right places. My dad knew at that time the best thing for Ty was to wrestle under Gus D'Agostino. So he made that change. Ty went on to win the states that year as a freshman. I got moved into the school district like halfway through that year. So I started in North Allegheny in 4th grade and halfway through 4th grade. And then the rest is kind of history from there. He had a absolutely phenomenal high school career. Like you said, 4-time Pennsylvania state champion. I think one of his biggest accolades at the Dapper Dan, the Pittsburgh Wrestling Classic, a 4-time Oklahoma state champion who went on to be a 3-time NCAA champion. They were actually teammates at North Carolina. But they wrestled in the Dapper Dan and Ty pinned him in 36 seconds. That's another good one to pull up on YouTube. That was kind of a crazy match. We missed it because my mom and dad were taking me to the Pennsylvania junior states and Ty was wrestling in the classic. So we actually missed it that night.
Wow. And who was the guy he wrestled?
TJ Jaworski.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I mean, that's a 3-time national champ. I mean,
yeah.
That's crazy. Wow. And so North Allegheny, did it have a reputation at that time as a dominant program, or was it on the come up?
No, it had a reputation. So Gus D'Agostino, that legendary high school coach, he was a 1952 Olympic alternate. He had wrestled at Lock Haven, went to North Allegheny, and got the wrestling program up and running. In the 1970s, they had a run of, I think, 3 Pennsylvania state titles, and they produced like the Herbert family, the Jake Herbert's father, Jim, and his older brothers. They were on that group in the 1970s, along with Gus's sons who wrestled. So they won some state titles in the 70s. In the 80s, there was kind of this resurgence when my dad made that move. One of the reasons why he made that move, Gus had kind of collected a very special group of guys that were going to make up that high school team. Ultimately, so back then, I think it was 12. It was either 12 or 13 starting weights. all but one of those starting wrestlers all went on to wrestle Division 1. So you have a high school team that they ended up winning 4 team titles in a row, but like 12 of the 13 starters ended up wrestling in college. They had 5 PIAA state champions in 1990 that year, which is in Pennsylvania. It's hard to put 5 guys in the finals, but they did, and they were a legendary program at that time.
So your brother won 4 individual and 4 team titles?
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
What? That
Yeah.
is, and you talk about Pennsylvania, 2 divisions, right? Big school, small school.
Yeah, double A and triple A, correct.
And I always get it wrong. Which one's the big? Which one's the smaller
The
schools?
the triple A is the bigger schools.
Okay.
Double A is the smaller schools. But historically, if you look at the results of guys that came through small school or big school, it's almost equal of how many went on to be NCAA champions
Mm.
or All-Americans at the college level. It's produced very well at both levels.
And in the before you even get to states, you guys are part of the famous WPIAL conference, which again, Illinois guy here didn't know a lot about it until I started this podcast, but that's like its own cult following in itself.
Yeah, again, it was something I didn't understand growing up, and it wasn't until I went to college. We had like in my college years, 97, 98, 99, it was kind of the high watermark of producing all Americans out of the WPIAL. So the WPIAL, for people that don't know, it is the area around the city of Pittsburgh. It's basically Western Pennsylvania, Southwestern Pennsylvania. It's only 150 high schools. So you break that into double A and triple A. And they have produced these are crazy numbers, but they have 39 Division 1 national champions that have come out of that little area, 179 All-Americans at the Division 1 level, right? That's only D1. So crazy numbers for a very small amount of schools. Now that's 150 schools, but not all 150 schools have wrestling. So the schools that have wrestling is even smaller than that. I don't know what the total number is,
Yeah.
but
Insane.
it's nuts.
And the fact, but it's even crazier that so like back in your era, so like was the Jones family, like Vertus Jones, was he from WPIAL?
Yeah. So Vertus and Mark Angle used to beat the living snot out of me at youth tournaments growing up. I could never beat those guys from like kindergarten through 8th grade. When we were all 7th and 8th grade, I want to say we were around like 80, 85 pounds. Um, here's a funny story for you. So in 7th grade, our school, North Allegheny, had a dual meet with Cannon McMillan. And Cannon McMillan decided to make that dual meet an assembly for their junior high. So our school, North Allegheny, we get on the bus early in the day. We drive to Cannon McMillan to one of their middle schools, and we get ready for a dual meet that they bring the whole junior high in to watch the middle school dual meet. Okay. I end up weighing in. I'm wrestling Mark Angle.
Oh God.
Takes me down, bars me up, runs me over, and pins me in 45 seconds. Right. So that's like people ask about my early days of wrestling. I was not like a superstar youth wrestler like Kerry Collette or Spencer Lee. Like I got throttled through youth and middle school, but they were some incredible guys that I got beat up by, right? The Mark Angles, the Vertus Joneses, and eventually Jeremy Hunter and I started having battles through high school. So yeah, it's kind of a crazy area. Here's some more statistics for you. So in 1996, the WPIAL only had one All-American, Kerry Collette, right? In 97, there were 6 of us that All-American. In 98, 7 of us. In 99, 7 of us. And then 2000, I'm out of the picture. And then rest of the guys that were there in 2000, they had 6 All-Americans. So in 4 years,
Wow.
that area of Pittsburgh produced like, I don't know what that number is. It's like
Crazy.
almost 30 some All-Americans at the D1s.
Well, and still going because Spencer Lee's from there, Nolf's from there. Um, I believe
Vincenzo Joseph, yeah,
Vincenzo. Yeah, I mean, like that's
yeah.
great. It's still going. And man, going back to that middle school thing though, that's crazy because I got to imagine, like, Kenny McMillan's a pretty decent wrestling school. I think Teasdale's from there. So like, were you guys like hyped going into this duel, or you just thought it was any other duel?
It was for us, it was just another dome. I mean, we were in junior high, right? So
Right, right.
anytime you got to get on the bus with your teammates and your friends and go on, ride to another school, do a dual meet, the ride back, maybe you got to eat dinner at a fast food restaurant. That for us, that was like
That's big
full
deal.
entertainment.
Yeah, that's
Um,
big time.
yeah, it
Was
was big
Mark
time.
Angle as strong as he looks? Because the dude looks insanely strong.
He's pretty jacked right now, but growing up, Marky didn't look like that. Mark was he was really rangy, um, kind of thinner. And if you go back to his college days when he was the year he was cutting to 26, man, he was really thin. But he did not look like he does now. I mean, he's put together now.
Man, that's so those are the guys you're like growing up with. And what about when you're on like Team Pennsylvania going out to Fargo? Who's like your roommate? Who's your bunkmate at training camp?
So I pretty much stayed with 2 guys on a lot of those trips. I roomed with Marky a good bit, and I would actually go and live at the Angles house in the summertime to get ready for Fargo. We were always one weight apart in juniors. So my 2 roommates were Jim Harshaw,
Mm-hmm.
who you've interviewed. He's doing extremely well now, podcaster, and he does like life coaching. And then Mark. And ultimately, Marky and I really connected because um, our freshman year, I only made the Greco team and went to juniors in Greco. So it was 1992. It was in Minneapolis. I go Greco. I don't even place at juniors. I placed at cadets that year. And Mark talked about those used to be separated. I placed it at cadets. I took fourth and fourth at cadets. Then a couple of weeks later, I go to juniors. I'm only on the Greco team and I don't place. But
Mm-hmm.
Mark ends up winning freestyle. And he knocked off some really good guys when he won it as a freshman. And he was like he was the catalyst for me to say like, okay, I'm done sucking. I don't want to suck anymore. I really want to jump levels. And so the year between that freshman summer and my sophomore year, I didn't qualify to the Pennsylvania States my freshman year. I didn't place at juniors. And then I came back my sophomore year and I ended up taking second at the Pennsylvania States. I lost to Jeremy Hunters in the finals after beating him 2 previous weekends that led up to the States.
Wow.
And then I went on and won the junior nationals in freestyle, and I won the next 2 summers. And so I won 3 junior nationals in a row. I actually didn't win a Pennsylvania state title until my senior year. So I was a runner up my sophomore year, third place my junior year, and then I finally won it as a senior.
What was it about that watching him win that did it for you?
It was just the reality of like, holy crap, like if Mark can do it, and I'm working out training with him all the time, if he can do it, then I should obviously be able to do it. And so the next year we came back, he moved up to 114 and a half. I was at 105 and a half and ended up putting together a good tournament and winning juniors that year.
And that's just when you say it like that, I mean, everyone knows the name Teague Moore, national champion, coach, all this. You don't until you get into the details, you don't realize that you didn't really have that turning point until after your freshman year, which some would consider is late, especially for someone whose family is like this pedigree of great champions. It's just it's cool that was the moment.
It was that sophomore that freshman year was extremely tough. Everybody had expectations because of what my brother had did, everybody had an expectation that I was going to be as good as him. And the reality was I wasn't as committed at that time. I hadn't matured enough physically or mentally to be ready to win at that level. And then during that freshman year, there was a number of things that happened where I really became embarrassed
Mm.
about my wrestling. And that's when everything, like the switch got flipped. Then I made the full commitment. I really started changing my life so that I could start to win on the wrestling mat. And I put the time in, put the effort in. I was blessed. I was extremely blessed for the coaches and the teammates that I was surrounded with that helped get me there. My opponents, and like I said, those guys that we all kind of came up together, um, we were friends, competitors, and enemies all at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that really helped me jump levels, and be able to start to compete on a national level. And then once I started winning national titles, then I set my goal as world titles, and to be able to eventually go and wrestle for John Smith. That was another like reality of like, this can happen. It's a matter of just putting the work in.
And would you say that your older brother was freakishly good and super dedicated, or just like really, really talented and not super dedicated?
Um, he was freakishly talented. He so Ty was interesting because I think about this a lot. If I could have gone back and coached my brother Ty, he Ty had an element that he could train and compete at an extremely high level.
Mm-hmm.
But he also had one very bad element, was that Ty also partied really, really hard, right? So he played hard and he worked hard, right? And so it was fun. In high school, Gus D'Agostino had the element, and their relationship was one that he was able to manage Ty off of the mats. Because really on the mats, all you had to do was really teach him and give him a path. It was
Right.
when he left the wrestling room is where he really needed some like hand holding through the process.
And so, like, now coming back to you, so like when you're a sophomore, you get back from Fargo, it's like it's about this time of year, right? It's like school starting up your sophomore year. What is your like daily routine switch to once you start going all in?
So there was we lived, I grew up right in front of a big cemetery. And so I could get up in the morning and I would go and run the cemetery. And it's in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So there's a bunch of hills throughout that
Mm-hmm.
cemetery. I started putting together workouts for the guys on my team. And so I started coaxing my teammates into getting up early. And 2 days a week, we would go to the high school and do like a drill before school started. If I wasn't doing that, I was getting up and going and lifting, and or going out and running and or lifting before I went off to school. And so for me, it was the commitment of what I was doing in the morning,
Mm-hmm.
and that then fell over into go and find a place to work out. We didn't have all the clubs that we have nowadays that kids can go and find. So it was literally phone calls. Hey, can you work out Wednesday evening? Okay, where can we go? And that's where there's like a lot of good story. Jim Harshaw has a lot of good stories. He and I broke into like probably 3 or 4 different high schools. We figured out how we could get into the high school wrestling rooms in the evening and get workouts in,
Isn't that
just so that we had a
hilarious?
place to practice.
Like you, that is like not only were there no coaches, you barely had a place to go. And like, yeah, like the janitors chasing you out. Maybe someone like knew a back door at the high school that was propped open by the lunch lady and like you could slip in there. It's like that was the reality. for all you guys, and like kind of at like I graduated in '07, so like '01, '02, I kind of remember that though, right? You're like sneaking in places. Now there's
Yeah.
clubs everywhere.
Yeah, it was a time when if you wanted to be good, you kind of had to figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
And it got to the point where like somehow, some way, I was able to get a hold of a key that
There we
eventually I was
go.
able to open the doors and goes in. But we would literally do these workouts. I'm sure Jim can tell these stories as well. We would go in and work out, no radio, and we would be really silent because there were janitors that would come by and check the wrestling room. But
Mm-hmm.
we knew how to lock the door. So once we got inside, we could lock it. Then they couldn't get in, right? So
Wow.
just it
Wow.
was looking back on it. I mean, we did some, we were idiots, but I mean, that's what we were doing with our time as opposed to going out and getting in trouble and doing things like that.
It's cool that it was you had like a little crew of guys you were doing it with, like you said, Mark Angle, Jim Hershaw, and like these guys are all just super dedicated, living near you, and yeah, what a cool atmosphere to grow up in. Now, were your high school teams at North Allegheny, were they state championship teams?
No, as a matter of fact, my 4 years in high school, I was either the only state qualifier or
What?
there were a couple of years I had one teammate that went with me. My team at North Allegheny at that time was not very good. Um,
So we
that's
went
why
from
that
4 straight titles when you're in fourth grade to when you're in high school to only one qualifier.
Yeah, correct. And it was just
Wow.
because there wasn't that there wasn't like a core dedicated group
Mm-hmm.
that was coming through at that time. There was a couple of us, right?
Right.
Um, but yeah, it was my high school assistant coach. So again, that freshman to sophomore year, my head coach hired after my freshman year. We hired an assistant coach. His name was Herb Monroe. He had wrestled at Lock Haven. He was a 118 pounder at Lock Haven. He came in and he was an elementary school teacher at North Allegheny and basically my workout partner. And so Herb, he was fresh out of Lock Haven. So he was fresh out of Division I wrestling,
Mm-hmm.
understanding that culture, that commitment. And he was another person that just beat me up on the wrestling mats and really brought me along that sophomore year, really took me to a different level.
I was gonna say that's probably perfect for you to have like a kind of a personal coach like that in a way.
Yeah, exactly. And he was a small 118 pounder. So at that time, I was still wrestling 103. So to have somebody that close to my size that was fresh out of college, it was a huge benefit. And I think that is an example of why Pennsylvania in wrestling has done so well.
Mm-hmm.
You have all these teachers colleges that started wrestling like back in the 40s and 50s. Those wrestlers in the college level would get teaching degrees, then they would come back to hometowns. They would start wrestling programs. So you had guys that wrestled at the Division I level coming back, becoming teachers and coaches. And if you look throughout Pennsylvania, that's a story that's very common.
Mm-hmm.
All Americans at Clarion's, Lock Havens, Edinburgh's, Bloomsburg's, they go back to small towns in their coaching. So the kids are learning wrestling at an extremely high level in Pennsylvania throughout the whole state.
That's huge. Yeah, I mean that's I know Ben Askren talks about that a lot on Flow. How many like if you have 14 colleges, there's that many more Division I wrestlers, and then they're going back to coach. So, I
Yeah.
mean, it's definitely a good theory because look how dominant Pennsylvania's been all those years. And I would love to go into some of these St. Ed's, North Allegheny battles, but we're a half hour and we haven't even got to the great John Smith yet. So, when's the first time John W. rings the household?
So my junior year in Fargo, he came over and introduced himself. Of course, it's John Smith. He really didn't need to introduce himself, but that's the way Coach is. Just extremely, extremely humble. Came over, said, "Teague, I'm John Smith. I'm the coach at Oklahoma State. I've been watching you here in Fargo, and would like to talk to you about coming and wrestling at Oklahoma State." And so from that junior nationals, I won. Mark Angle took second. We did a recruiting trip together to Oklahoma State. Besides Oklahoma State, I took a visit to Penn State and Cornell. Or I actually didn't take my visit to Cornell. I was planned to go to Cornell, but I did my visit to Oklahoma State, Penn State. I made the decision after Mark and I did our visit. We were at the Tulsa airport getting on our planes. He said, "What do you think you're going to do?" I said, "This is the place for me. This is where I want to be." And Mark said, "I think I'm going to go to Clarion." And I couldn't look at Clarion because they had Sheldon Thomas, who was an NCAA champion in '96. And I knew if I go to Clarion, I'm going to be going head to head at 118 with Sheldon.
Was
And
he a
so the
PA
opportunity,
guy or was
no,
he?
no, Sheldon was Delaware. He Sheldon Thomas, three-time junior national freestyle champion from Delaware,
Wow.
went and wrestled at Clarion 118 pounds. He was a national champion, I think two or three-time All-American there at Clarion. So that wasn't an option for me
Right.
because yeah, I would have had Sheldon and Mark at 18 and 26.
And Penn State, Jeremy Hunter. I heard the name Jeremy Hunter was legendary during that time in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, so Jeremy and I we wrestled in high school my sophomore year. The Whippeal made a weird change that year. So my sophomore year, we wrestled Whippeals. Then we came back the next weekend and we wrestled the top six from the first week, came back and they added city schools in, which they all the city school kids lost their first match in like the first period.
Right.
So we basically re-wrestled the Whippeal. I beat Jeremy, and then lost to him in the state finals. Fast forward to college, he was a year behind me. I was a
Okay.
95 grad, he was 96. And on my visit to Penn State, the coach at that time, John Fritz, had said, we really want you to come to Penn State, but we're also looking at Jeremy Hunter. So there's a chance that both of you could end up here at Penn State. And at that point, I said, I'm going to Oklahoma State. So
Man. So you go out and you got to imagine John Smith when he's at that junior nationals, he's recruiting Guerrero. He's also seeing this guy, Stephen Abbas, another brother of a great champion, and Jerry Abbas. And is that the year you beat Abbas at Fargo, or is that a different year?
no, that was my junior year that year. He and I,
Oof.
so it was the old polls.
Mm-hmm.
And so we both came out of our poll and I think it was the semifinals. Um, he and I, we were scrapping back and forth, and I was losing by one right at the very end. There was like, we went out of bounds. There was like 15 seconds left. And we came back in. I shot a high crotch and shoulder bumped him up and wrapped his far leg and drove him to his back. So I got three and ended up winning the match off of it. So
Love it. I love it. So at that point, did you have any idea that Oklahoma State was recruiting you, or was this that kind of like the first time you thought it was a reality to go to Stillwater?
um, I think John talked to me. It was after that match.
Mm.
So after the Abbas win, I believe it was we were getting ready for the finals that evening because that was in the morning. I think John talked to me during that break. And then once I had that conversation with him and I came home from juniors, it's this time of the year, you're getting ready. Back then, you did your official visits like in the fall. Nothing was really planned prior to. And I can remember having that conversation specifically with my dad, my brother Ty, and Ty's assistant coach at North Carolina at that time was Kendall Cross.
Ooh.
And so Kendall's conversation was probably the most influential on me because Kendall said, "Look, you've won two juniors now. You're a lot of these coaches are gonna come banging on your door, and here's the things you really need to think about. What place is going to give you the environment to be able to win at the highest level? What are the coaches going to be like? What are the teammates going to be like? And so his conversation with me is really what intrigued me and led me to follow through and make the decision at Oklahoma State.
Wow. Kendall Cross, the legend, friend of the show. Well, that's incredible that and at this point, he hasn't won gold in Atlanta yet.
That's correct. Yeah.
Because you got to.
He was in between 90. He had made the team in 92 and he was still training in 96. So he was thick in it. Like he was high in USA Wrestling on our ladder. And so for me to be able to even just get his opinion was absolutely phenomenal for me. And he made a lot of it very down to earth, right? He talked about what's your life going to be like when you're out of the wrestling room? What type of environment do you want to have? And so it helped lead me to the decision that I made.
So you get there in August of 95. John Smith is 3 years out of competing. So when you're in the wrestling room, are you actually wrestling, coach?
Back then he used to drill with us. He didn't wrestle much live, but he would still get on the mats and drill with us. Between coach and also Mark Perry Sr. was our assistant there. Mark Perry Sr. was still getting on the mats with us.
That's scary. That's scary.
Directly above me was Eric Guerrero. So it was kind of the common theme of my career. Like Mark Angle used to beat the crap out of me. And then I go to college and Guerrero's above me and Guerrero beats the crap out of me. Right. Again, forcing me to raise levels and wrestle to a higher level. And then the lineup from there, Steven Schmidt, who was a national finalist runner-up, Scotty Renee, who was a 3-time All-American, Hardale Moore, Jimmy Arias, Mark Branch, Mark Smith, all those guys throughout the lineup. It was the type of environment. Everybody was setting their goals on national titles. And so for me, that was what I wanted to be surrounded by and just live the lifestyle so that you could win a national championship.
Yeah, those teams are crazy. Jamil Kelly, who, Olympic silver medalist, didn't even All-American during those teams. I'm sure he's sick of hearing that stat, but it's a crazy one. Yeah, it's a crazy one.
Jamil came in a little bit later. He was a junior college transfer. So Eric and I think Eric and I were in our junior year, the year that Jamil came in.
What about DC? Was he there during that time or no?
No, DC was after us. And so once I had graduated and was getting on the circuit wrestling freestyle, that's when Daniel came in.
Okay. But you look back at those.
Pendleton, Esposito, like all those guys were the group right after us.
Got it. And those times, Iowa. So in 94, Oklahoma State wins it. And then Iowa wins the rest of the 90s. But Oklahoma State's getting a team trophy every one of those nationals. So when you got there, was Guerrero also you guys got there at the exact same time, or was he already there?
We were roommates. We came in the fall of 95, and we were roommates that fall. I ended up moving out and moving off campus during that fall. I ended up living with our 190-pounder Aaron Strobel. So that I could live off campus. I did the dorms for me I didn't like the environment of the dorms. So really? I ended up choosing to live off campus at that point.
What kind of a talent was Guerrero back in those days when you were first getting your hands on him?
Eric, as he was throughout his whole career, extremely tough in the practice room and competitively. Obviously his results show, Olympian, 3-time NCAA champion. Eric, so, for wrestling fans, when you go into practice, you've got partners that you can grab a hold of and go through an easy drill with, right? You got partners that you put your hands on with, and it's really tough to drill with. With Eric, when you came into practice, it was always like right below the level of going live. So as you're drilling, he would drill his stuff, you'd start to drill your stuff, and he would start working defense, right? And then he would drill his offense, and you'd start to work again. But
that's so annoying.
what happened? Well, here's what I appreciated from it. When you got into a workout if you were partners with Eric, your energy output and your effort was like at 99% the whole go. The
Yeah.
drilling. Then when you wrestled live, his speed, his technical knowledge, like all of those things added up, you were getting tested the full practice. And
Mm-hmm.
honestly, I really feel like between Eric and the other teammates and the coaches that I had, I always felt like it was a disservice to my teammates and my coaches if I went out to compete and I would lose, because they're giving me everything that I need to win. And so there's no excuse when I step on the mat. I'm definitely prepared mentally and physically. And so that was kind of my take on everything. When I stepped onto the mat, it was kind of like I've done everything I could possibly do. My teammates got me ready, my coaches got me ready. Now it was time for me to perform.
And what were your, first couple years in, you're around John Smith, the legend. What are some of your like early your memories or biggest takeaways, just from being around him in that program in your early years at Okie State?
There was there was nothing there was nothing that we couldn't accomplish, right?
Mm-hmm.
There was an air of we were expected to win at the highest levels, right? So even when we were in college, conversations were about winning world championships and being the best in the world. And so, like, when I think back on those times, they were it was very demanding because your expectation was to perform at the highest level. And we did, as you mentioned, we had really good teams back then. We were ranked number one going into the Nationals my sophomore, junior, and senior year, and had beaten Iowa in the dual meets, but we ended up second, and third at the NCAAs in those years. We couldn't get over the hump. We had some injuries that happened that were just nothing other than freak accidents. So there were some injuries and there were some performances at the NCAA championships that we didn't get the points that we needed. And I don't think it was because of a lack of preparation or effort. Sometimes winning, you have to be as much lucky as you do prepared.
Mm-hmm.
And for us in those years, we just, for some reason, we couldn't get luck and preparation to go together.
Yeah. No, it's so hard to win. The team title is just, it's so difficult. And, you mentioned the coaches you were with there. One of my favorite people that I've ever interviewed, Pat Smith. Did you get to interact with Pat much, or was he more on like the middle and upper weights?
I interacted with Pat and learned an immense amount from Pat and JJ McGrew. I ended up living with Pat. When I finished my 4 years of college, I still had Eric and I never redshirted. We went into Oklahoma State, wrestled straight 4 years because we both wanted to get on the circuit for the 2000 Olympics. Pat, I went and lived with Pat after my 4th year when I was finishing my 21 credits to graduate. And Pat always brought to me, he brought a level of like patience and acceptance for my wrestling and for my life. Like, he was always really good with getting me to see a bigger picture, in that, like, he would always say, Teager, it's just a wrestling match, right? And for me, Pat always had a way of kind of calming me and getting me to relax in the moment, which I needed. Like, I'm sure if you look through my history, like, I made some really stupid mistakes. I got police escorted out of dual meets. I did a lot of stupid shit in college. Pat was my coach that could pull me aside and calm me down because I was already amped. Like, I didn't need to drink a Red Bull. By my nature, I was already like, I was ready to go.
Yeah, you
So
look at some of those. I really encourage listeners, go watch the 98 semis, Teague and Jurgens, and then 99 semis, Teague and Abbas. You come out every match like a buzzsaw, just ready to go. And so there's a lot of energy, a lot of passion. And you talk about Pat, the word, when you were describing that, I was thinking calm. You said calm. Like, he just calms you out. It's like,
Yeah.
it's a very be a very nice thing to have him in your corner. And then, so did you come back to Oklahoma State at all? I saw you were a coach there in 04 when they were on that 4-peat run, because that's always
Yeah.
one of the documentaries I've wanted to do, is that 4-peat.
Yeah. So I finished my senior year of wrestling was March of 99. Like I said, I had 21 credits to graduate. So I did them all that fall. That's when I was living with Pat. And then I accepted an assistant coaching position at Pitt in 2000, January of 2000. So I go to Pitt. I end up, really, I took that position because Senshiro Abe was coaching at Pitt so that
Mm-hmm.
I could work with him on my freestyle. So 2000, 2001, I'm at Pitt. Then I go to Oklahoma under Jack Spates for 2002, 2003. In At the World Team Trials in 03, John said, we'd really like to get you back to Stillwater for the Olympic year in 04. So I made the move to Stillwater in 04. And then I got the assistant position or I was able to take a coaching position at Harvard in 5-6. And then I got my first head job at Clarion in 07. And then that led to American in 2011.
Got it. Okay. And so that's a good segue, because I do want to, we're going to talk about your wrestling consulting business, because that's something that I think is really unique and is really needed. So what is that, and how did you start that?
So I started the wrestling consulting business because when I finished at American in 2021, I recognized there's a huge gap for high school wrestlers and parents of just understanding the whole recruiting process. And as I mentioned, those schools that I had worked at, there's a lot of different processes that you could potentially go through for the application, but even more so with recruiting. How does a high school wrestler get recognized by college coaches? How do you put yourself in front of college coaches? So I had 20 years of coaching knowledge, and I understood what a wrestler should be looking for. I understand what questions they should be asking. And most parents nowadays, if their son wants to wrestle, the vast majority of high school parents, they don't understand the landscape. They
Mm-hmm.
don't know how many Division I schools are there, which of those Division I schools offer the degree options that my son or my daughter is looking for, right? Not every school has engineering, right? And is your son or daughter a Division I, Division II, or a Division III wrestler? Or maybe they should look at NAIA or junior college. There's so many options right now for the high school wrestler. I started the consulting business so that I can help them funnel their options, hopefully to the right school and the right coach, so that they're not having to transfer once they get to their school.
I think it's much needed, and I'm so glad that we're going to be partnering on it. And if folks want to, we're going to come back to wrestling, because I have some big questions I got to ask you about. But for the wrestling consulting business, perfect time of year. And a lot of folks who listen to this, their kids are wrestling for the first time. They never wrestled. So how would they get in touch with you for that?
Very simple. You can go to the website, thewrestlingconsultant.com, or you can email me, thewrestlingconsultant@gmail.com. And what I do is I'll schedule a free introduction call, so that way I can get on the phone with the parents. They can ask questions. They can kind of tell me where their wrestler's at, and then in the introduction call, I say, here's what I think I can do for you and your family. If they sign up for my packages, it's basically in its simplest form. I work with them for 4 weeks, 8 weeks, or 12 weeks. The
Mm-hmm.
4 weeks is really just giving them the nuts and bolts. When I hear their story, I give them schools to get in communication with. If we do the 8 week program, it goes a little bit further. I do a little bit more with them to get them prepared. In the 12-week program, we actually start breaking down their wrestling and really trying to find out what is the college coach going to be looking for in your wrestling. So now I start to give some pointers on, here's what you need to be drilling. These are the areas when I watch their videos. these are the areas that you've got to start to improve on that a college coach is going to notice
Mm-hmm.
and hopefully want you on their team with.
And folks, he knows what he's talking about because we're talking about an NCAA champ here. How many international tours? I can't even tell you. And then all those years coaching as an assistant and head coach in D1. It's just it's a really cool thing, and I can't wait for folks to start engaging with it. I'm sure they already have been, many times over. I wanted to go back to a few big moments that we haven't talked about yet. Tell me about your first NCAA title. I mean, first and only, but like just your NCAA title. What was that moment like for you?
The moment of winning was exhilarating. For me, there was a lot of emotion that went into that national title. The previous year, 1997, I lost in the semis to Jesse Whitmer from Iowa, a guy that I had previously beaten at the national duels, and then I lost to him in the semis. That was during Gable's final run in 97.
What was the crowd like in that match? Was it just chaos or what? Did you notice it?
Uh, the crowd, not so much, because in 97, we were at the Unidome at UNI,
Yeah.
and the crowd was really far away. But because it was Gable's last year in Iowa, of the tickets sold there, I'm going to say like 60 or 70% of that arena were Iowa fans, Gable fans. And I remember in that Whitmer match, Jesse wrestled a really good match. He came out with a strategy to nullify the things that I had just beaten him with 2 weeks before.
Mm-hmm.
And he executed well. I made some very bad errors. I was taking shots that weren't there. Nonetheless, he beat me. That environment was just, I mean, when the crowd went nuts, my whole body shook from the amount of noise that was in there, right? And that was the year Iowa went on, set the point record and all of that. So I come back the next year, my junior year. That's where I beat Juergens in the semi. So now I'm in the finals against David Morgan, a guy that had majored me in the dual meet earlier in the season up at Michigan State. And like I said, there was a lot of emotion in it for me because my father had died kind of unexpectedly during my sophomore season. So I really felt like I never got to honor him with all of the things that he gave me to be able to be a wrestler and do what I was doing. When I won that national title, it was, for me, it was really kind of a way of saying thank you to him for everything he had done for me so that I could wrestle. On top of that, and I've talked about this in other podcasts, I almost got kicked out of that NCAA tournament.
Why?
So during my first match, I'm wrestling Steve Garland, the now coach at UVA. And we kept going back and forth. Now, mind you, it's a very heated team race between Iowa and Oklahoma State, and everybody knew that. And we needed bonus points. And every time I'd get a lead on Garland, he would inch his way back into the match. And he was always like 3 points behind, 5 points behind, 3 points behind. Like I couldn't get it to an 8-point lead. I won the match, got my hand raised. And when I was walking off the mat, press row was like right on top of the mats. That year in Cleveland, the arena was tiny. And I came off the mat and I kicked the table. And when I kicked the table, a laptop went flying. And it turns out, I mean, it was 1998 where laptops were not like
Right.
very common. It was a press row guy, and I broke his laptop. So they made me come back to the arena. Pat Smith comes to my room in between sessions and says, "Hey, you got to come over to the arena. They're going to vote on kicking you out of the tournament." And anybody that knows Pat was like always pulling pranks. And I was like, "Pat, I just need to get some rest. Like, can you just leave me alone right now?" He's like, "No, I'm serious. You have to come to the arena. They're going to vote if you're going to stay in or get kicked out of the tournament." So I had to go into this room. All the decision makers there were in the room. They questioned me about what went on. I said, "You know what? I won a match that I thought I should have won by more. I was frustrated. I kicked the first thing that was near me. It was a table. I didn't mean to break the laptop. So they take me out of the room and they do a vote right there to allow me to move forward in the tournament.
How
And
nervous were you?
yeah, I was like,
That's
at that point I
insane.
kind of like threw my hands up and I was like, you're an idiot. If this is the way if this is the way your junior season ends, you're an idiot. Luckily, Bruce Baumgardner, who knew our family, really stepped up and spoke positively of me in that meeting. And I think, in my opinion, really helped sway them to allow me to finish the tournament. So to answer your original question, it's a
Oh,
long-winded way of
no, it's
saying
good. This is
it
good.
was it was a really emotional win because of, my father having had passed. The 2 days before, on Thursday, I didn't even know if I was going to be in the tournament anymore. And then
Gosh.
I get into the finals against a guy that had, mopped me up in the dual meet, and I ended up getting a fall in that match. So it was exhilarating.
How'd you celebrate?
Um, we went and did our after party with OSU, and then I went back to the hotel and slept. That was it. That was it. That was
I
it.
mean,
I did all my celebrating once we got back to Stillwater.
gotcha. A fall in the finals. I did not watch the match. How'd it happen?
I shot a low single, and he came up over top like a north-south position. And Coach Smith, we had drilled a position where if that happens, you can trap a guy's wrist, and when you sit him back, I'm now laying on him, but I'm looking up at the ceiling. He's on his back, and so I have him trapped. And
Mm-hmm.
so I was able to keep him there. And you can see it in the video when you watch it. The referee is looking to see if I have control, but then at the same time, he's looking to see if Morgan is flat, and he makes the call, which, from an official's perspective, the guy's shoulders are flat. It's the right call, but it's really kind of a gutsy call for an official because he hasn't even called a takedown yet,
Mm-hmm.
but he sees that the guy's flat. And as the rule book states, if your shoulders are flat,
Call
game
it,
over.
man. And that was an NCAA title 118 and last 118 national champ, right? Because the weight
Yeah.
class changed.
Yeah, that's correct. In the books, I'm the last 118 pounder.
Wow. And man, there's literally notes and notes that we haven't got to. I know we're about an hour in here, and I don't want to keep
Yeah.
you too long. I really appreciate you coming on the podcast. I would just say that there's literally hundreds of stories I want to ask you about, like the Mongolia trip, or Angry Fish, and all these legends that have come through. I mean, yeah, but I just want to kind of wind down with just, you mentioned wrestling's been a big part of your life, literally your life. What do you think are some of the best things that's come out of it for you in terms of the values and lessons learned?
Lessons learned. The sport of wrestling for me has given me the ability to overcome and deal with or adapt to situations that are not in your favor. And I think that's where the sport of wrestling can be so helpful to young people, because wrestling gives you the element that it's on you. You've got to do the work. And if you do the work, you have a chance to succeed. It's not a guarantee that you're going to succeed. And when you compound that with weight management, having to make weight, you compound that with the stresses of being the only person out there that's going to be able to get you to a win or get your hand raised. The sport of wrestling for me has helped me through the toughest points in my life. I mentioned my father passing. I've had three brothers that have passed. Dealing with their losses, I feel like the sport of wrestling has given me the tools to be able to deal with it.
I'm
You
sorry to
know,
hear that. Yeah.
yeah. So, wrestling has, it sounds like a lot of my things are negatively attributed, but the toughest times in your life is really where I believe the sport of wrestling is going to help you. And for all of us that are going to wrestle with something in life, the takeaways are that you can survive and you can come back to fight another day. And that's really where wrestling has helped me.
Yeah. No, and I love the it's just the perspective you're talking about is like, because in life we're gonna have some really difficult moments, whether it's work, personal, whatever. And for people who haven't done sports or people who haven't done wrestling, when they hit those moments in their 20s or 30s, it could be the first time they see real adversity. Whereas someone like you battled through it in the practice room, winning heartbreaking matches, losing heartbreaking matches. You've seen it all. So it is to me, it's kind of how I think about it as well. I also love the story that you told about how you and your brother celebrated after your 1998 title. Like, that is just so powerful, man. Like, that is it triggered in my mind when you said that there. But yeah, man, it's crazy.
Yeah. It was my career was one that I have no regrets on. My wrestling career, I'm very appreciative and helpful for all the opponents that I've had. And now to see the guys that, like my brother Ty that we talked about, he helped coach Coleman Scott, Jake Herbert, like guys that have done really amazing things in the sport of wrestling. To know that we're all connected because of the sport of wrestling is very special.
And Coleman going to Okie State?
Yeah.
Crazy.
Big changes.
What do you
Big
think?
changes. I'm excited. I'm really excited. I mean, my girlfriend and I are going to be going to Stillwater here pretty soon. And really, I want to do it just because I want to be a part of this energy that is coming back into the program, and let Coach Smith know that, I'm very appreciative for everything he's done for me in my life. And so letting Coach enjoy and understand how much of an impact he's made on all of us. And then obviously to see Coleman move forward, to take over the program, I'm extremely excited for him. I think he's got all the tools to get Oklahoma State back on top. And as an alumni, I'm ready to see it happen.
It's crazy because you've been connected with UNC through your brother. He was at UNC. Now he's going back. Kendall was at UNC. And so it's like, it's all this kind of connected in some way.
Yeah, wrestling, as I think most of us could agree, it's very incestuous, right? Like
Definitely.
someone's coaching here that wrestled for this person there, and everybody knows everybody. There's not 6 degrees of separation. There's like 1 degree of separation, no matter where you go.
Absolutely. Well, Teague Moore, man, it's been such a pleasure, man. We got to get you back on because I'm telling you, there's so much we didn't talk about. I wish you nothing but the best as you head into the weekend, man. And thanks again for the partnership on the wrestling consultant. I'm really excited to be working with you.
Ryan, I want to say this to you. I appreciate what you're doing for the sport. I mean, you are telling stories that I think not only for us, like the wrestling junkies. I love your podcast because you get into the nuts and bolts of what made people succeed. But even more so, I think you're doing a great service for people that are learning the sport, and you're bringing some of the best stories to them in a way that they can be digested. So I just appreciate what you're doing, and I'm supporting you because I believe in your product.
Thank you very much, man. It means a lot. And many good times to come, man. Thank you again
Amen.
for coming on, Teague.
Yep. Thanks. Take care, Ryan.
Take care, brother.